Hey all, hope you're doing great. Today I thought that I'd talk to you about the different data types in C++ and how they work. So if you're encountering information in a computer program, it's usually only of two types, either numeric information or textual information. And then depending on the nature of the information that you want to store, you decide the data types that your variables are going to be that you're going to use in the program. So if we're talking about numeric information, as you can see, it's usually categorized into two types. So if you're storing whole numbers, meaning numbers that don't have any decimal points in them, you use the data type integers. And if you have real numbers that you want to store, meaning that they might have some decimal points in them, then you use floating point data type. And these are further divided into other subcategories depending on the range of numbers that they can encompass, or depending on how much memory they use, or depending on their typical size. So here too, if you're talking about short, it's typically of 2 bytes, and int is basically of 4 bytes, and long int is also 4 bytes. There's also a long int, which is of 8 bytes, but that's rarely used, so it's not significant and it's not worth discussing. And coming over to floating point, a float is typically of 4 bytes, a double is of 8 bytes, and a long double is also of 8 bytes, but some compilers consider it to be 10 bytes. So I'm going to show you a table of the different ranges that they have, and you can pause the video and note it down if you want to. But basically, that's just to give you an idea. And now that you know about the different ranges that these data types encompass, you should also know basically how to define their variables. And like I told you before, that once you know the data type that your variable is going to hold or that it's going to store, then all you need to know is what keyword to type in to define that variable, and basically you need to have a name for the variable. So if, for example, you are defining a short, the keyword is also short, and let's name that marks. So that's basically how you define it. You just type in the keyword attributed to that particular data type, and then you name the variable. And if you're talking about int, the keyword is also int, and let's say days since quarantine, which are 180. So what I want to talk about over here is that, like I told you before, that whatever is to the right of the equal to operator is the literal or the constant that is being assigned to that particular variable. So because 180 in this case is being assigned to an integer data type, so it's called an integer literal. And the problem that arises here is that because 180 is basically, it doesn't have, it's a whole number, it doesn't have any decimals in it. So in the same way, if we say long, and let's say money, and say 32,000. So if we do that, or if we say long hours equals to, let's say 320. So what happens is that because this 32,000 and this 320 they're basically integer literals, just like 180, because they don't have any decimal points in them. So what happens is that the compiler sometimes makes the mistake of saving these, or of storing these basically in the place of an integer, like an integer literal. And so the way that you can force them to be stored as long, or the way that you can force this to be stored as a long, is basically that you append a capital L to the end of the literal that you intend to be a long, and you append 2 capital L's to the end of the literal that you want to be stored as a long. That's basically how you solve that problem. So I think that's enough for numeric information. And moving on to textual information, this is basically categorized into 2 main data types, which are namely the character data type and the string data type. So first of all, we're going to talk about the character data type. And this data type, basically, it typically takes up just 1 byte of memory, because it only stores individual characters. It cannot store, one variable of the character data type cannot store more than 1 character. And the keyword for that basically is to define that as char, and let's, for example, say section. So another interesting thing to note about this is that you cannot just directly go ahead and state the character literals. You cannot directly go ahead and say A, and then obviously terminating with a semicolon. You can't do that, because if you run that program, it will give you an error, and you cannot enclose this in double quotations either. What you need to do is that you need to enclose this in single quotations. So whatever character literal that you're going to define, it needs to go in single quotations. That's just the rule. And if you're talking about string data type, the thing is that for string data types, you need to include a whole new directive. Like you include IOStream input output stream, then you need to include hashtag include C string, or you can also call it just string. If you want to use a string data type in a program, this needs to be included. And the way you define that is that you just write string. String is the keyword. And let's, for example, say subject. So the string literal, it needs to be, as you can assume, it needs to be in double quotation marks. Let's just say programming over there and end with a semicolon. So that's how you do that. Let's see how we can display that. Let's say string subject, sorry, cout subject, and let's go ahead and run that program. So as you can see, it displayed programming, which is the whole string, and it needs to be written within these double quotation marks. And that's it for the textual information. Though there is another kind of data type that I would like to discuss with you. And that is the bool data type, which is basically used whenever you need to kind of validate the authenticity of a statement, because the bool data type, it can either be set to true or false, or alternatively you can say that true is 1 and false is 0. And the way to define this is that the keyword is also bool, and for example, let's name it fact and let's say true. If you go ahead and you display that, let me just move to the next line so that there's no confusion. So if you display cout fact, what you'll see is that instead of this true being displayed, what you're going to see is instead of this true being displayed, what you're going to see is the number 1. And if it was false, you would have seen the number 0. As you can see, so after programming, it's 1. So it's basically, it's a yes or no data type. True means 1 and false means 0. And I think that's all for all the data types in C++. Let me know if I missed anything or if you have any questions. Like and subscribe, and thank you for watching my video. See you next time.